Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Milen. I'm a personal stylist, and today we're talking about curves, hips. So we're talking about curves, but more specifically, what's going on in that hip area on your body, and then knowing which one you are so that you can dress it appropriately, where you make it shine, where you really honor whatever curve type you've got. Let's get right into it. Starting with angular curves, but really it's more angular hips. Narrowness, narrow hips, you can call it. Essentially, angular hips don't have fleshiness as the dominant trait. So, angular hips can look different on different body types, but they are all angular. What this means is that your frame, your bone structure is much more of an impact than any fleshiness found on the hip area. When you look at your body straight on, it'll have more of a straight or even inverted triangle look to it, or super narrow versus any extreme roundness or any roundness. You can have fleshiness there, but if your overall frame, like your entire body, is more bone structure or frame dominant, that means your bones and the way that your frame, the box, the bone structure is, if that is more dominant, the thing we notice first before any softness on your body, then you have angular hips. What that means is that you don't need to accommodate, to emphasize your hip area because it's not the dominant thing on your body. So generally speaking, angular bodies will have something else that kind of grabs someone's attention when you look at them, or what's a more dominant trait. So an angular, very tall person, it's their height, it's their long limbs, it's their, angularity everywhere. For others, it can be their petiteness and maybe the fact that they're very angular but very compact and small. It's not, oh, they're curvy, or oh, they've got some serious hips going on. No. So when you're dressing on top of those curves on that kind of frame or those kinds of frames, you're not looking at it in that traditional, very feminine way. That is not to say that this isn't feminine, it's just a different type of curve. It's just a different type of hip. And you'll look really good in stiffer fabrics, anything that kind of mimics angularity that you've got going on in your hip area. So that's A-line or super straight cuts. If you think of your hips more like a box or a small bone dense area, less about soft and fleshiness, then it makes sense that you're gonna put kind of more of a boxier shape on top of a box. It's just a way to harmonize angularity with angularity. And the more you do that, the more beautiful, the more sexy, the more feminine you become in your version. So really try to mimic those straighter lines. You don't want flowiness, you don't want tightness necessarily, you do want straight or triangle shapes. What is cool about this curve type, and I'm calling it curve, but really it's just kind of like a hip type, is that when you dress it accordingly, so angular with angular, you're going to look slimmer, you're going to look more elegant, you're also going to, like I said, look more feminine, something that your body type really pulls off. Whereas other body types that try to wear the exact same thing are not gonna have that same impact that your body type with those kinds of curves are gonna have. It's very stunning, it's beautiful. There is nothing sexier than someone really embracing what they have and working with it and honoring it. That's timeless. What happens when you try to force against it, that's when you start to feel like, oh, I'm so angular or I'm so masculine trying to look feminine. That's when you start to feel that uncomfortable. Why doesn't this work for me? It brings you into a headspace of, I'm not good enough, or I don't have what they have, and it's comparing and it's negative. So when you embrace the angularity and wear things that really complement it, that bring it alive, that's when you feel sexy. That's when you feel very feminine. That's when you feel less odd or less constricting against something that wasn't made for your shape. Last thing to remember with this one, if you're very tall, you can go for a longer straight cut over your hips. And if you are shorter, then like very petite, you'll look really good with like a miniature square triangle on top of those hips. Next is called musculature hips. Very similar to the angular hips. They've got that angularity in them. They're just a little bit more blunt. And by that, they could mean wideness. Now, again, this is not directly related to the softness, that like fleshiness that collects there. It can. So there's two types of that musculature hip, that wide hip. There are very narrow musculature hips where it's more muscle than anything. And then there are hips that are very wide and have that musculature, but then there's a lot of softness sitting on top. So they are curve and soft dominant in that point, but it's on such a wide and very muscular frame that it's not intense enough. It's almost like the two things are competing for each other a little bit. So you have a different set of hips versus someone who's very angular or someone that has lots of fleshiness around their hips. The second one to that is that very angular but musculature one. So they tend to lose any shape in their hip if they gain weight. It becomes straighter, boxier. That's a really good indication. They also have a bit more width at times, or they're on a frame that's very inverted triangle. Both of these types have some wideness, whether it's at the top, coming down, or at the hip area, and both have that musculature present. And both of these body types, or both of these curve types, demand flow. Now, what do I mean by flow? I mean something that is unconstructed, something that just kind of flows down the body. It doesn't mean super tight, and it doesn't mean very stiff and structured. It just means unconstructed. For the angular types, you're gonna have no waist emphasis because it's not your dominant thing. But either your height or your musculature, that frame, that blunt frame is very prominent, and so that takes stage. And for that type of curve, you want something that just kind of flows on top, like you're a tree trunk and the leaves kind of flowing, just sitting on it. For the rounder shapes or the softer shapes on top of that wide frame, you still want that flow, but you want it with an emphasized waist, slightly. Because you're not extremely fleshy all over, you've got width. And so you want to accommodate for that width by having a little bit of breathing room. Think of width as needing that breathing room. It needs the breathing room. It needs a little bit of unconstruction. That's not a word. And waist emphasis. And that looks stunning on both of these body types. If there's no waist emphasis, that's when you look like a blob. Sorry. The angular ones don't need waist emphasis. They can, but it's not necessary. If that softer frame wears something really tight fitting, generally speaking, this is a good clue to know if this is your body type or this is your curve type, is to know, or you feel like a sausage. Because there's so much width and muscle underneath the softness, it's not fully soft, and so it's almost competing. It'll feel sausagey, it'll feel like you're larger than you are and you're not. It's not gonna complement that softness that you need to complement the soft body, the soft flesh, but enough movement and unconstruction that width needs. Just let it breathe. Number 3, moderate hips. Now, moderate hips have two different versions as well. They'll have a softer version and a more angular version, but neither are extreme. So if you have an hourglass shape, but it's not extreme, it's there a little bit, and the rest of your body frame, like your arms, your legs, the whole thing, very moderate, average, nothing stands out, then you've got softer, moderate hips or curves. If you're very moderate all over, but you've got just like a little bit of angularity, nothing's crazy, you're not super tall, you're not super short, you're not super sharp everywhere, it's just a little bit, then you've got angular, moderate hips. Both of these look wonderful in structured or tailoring. However, the only difference is the angular can hold on to that more of a straighter angular shape, and the softer one can add just a little bit of softness, a tiny bit of flow. What's important on these shapes are fabric. Good quality fabrics that hold their shape, that feel like they are very structured and can be handled by a very moderate frame. That's what you want to go for. So cashmeres, wools, silks, anything that feels not luxurious, but kind of higher quality. You don't want cottons as much because it's gonna feel off a little bit on a very moderate frame that needs something good quality that's not going to shift its shape too much, essentially. And both of them look really good with a little bit of breathing room between them and the clothes. So you don't want things skin tight on either side. You just want a little bit of breathing room on the straighter, kind of more angular ones, and then you want a little bit of breathing room on the flowier ones. They both can handle waist, definition, and emphasis. So the angular ones can do defined waist, not necessary, but they look good in it, put together as a moderate frame near their hips. And the softer version can look really beautiful in waist emphasis in all their outfits. Adds that softness they need. Literally all of it is all very moderate and nothing too extreme. Not extreme flowiness, not extreme softness, not extreme angularity, not extremely straight. A middle ground. And the last one is that soft, luscious curviness. Now these are dominantly rounded, dominantly fleshy. That means we almost don't see the frame as much. We're really looking at the flesh. And so that shape is very rounded. It's on an hourglass shape generally, and in very extreme fashion most of the time. We think curvy, curves, softness when we see you way more than any frame, angular, bone structure. We're just thinking curvy. And because that's your dominant trait, you want to play it up. And so you want to drape around it, you want to soften it, you want to hug it, you want some tightness around it. Because that flesh is so soft, putting really soft materials on top of it, it's soft on soft, and that always looks beautiful. You're mimicking it, you're honoring it, and that looks incredible. And your frame can handle it because your frame is mostly softness, mostly lusciousness, fleshiness, and roundedness. So you want to do round on round. You can also do flow, of course, but you do really shine when we are seeing that fleshiness really emphasized and hugged. And that's it. That's it for your curve type. Let me know down below if you kind of know or you do know your curve type. If you have any questions about your body type, how to identify your curves or your coloring or your essences, all my information is down below. I do all those packages and more. And I hope this was incredibly helpful for you. Just a little taste. We'll get more into it, I promise. Thank you for watching and have a beautiful, curvy day.